International security analyst David Otto is live for us from the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Appreciate your time this evening. Now, what is your assessment of Ecowas' decision to activate its standby force to restore constitutional order in Niger? How significant is this move in the context of regional stability?
Well, this is very significant. There are two things that we must delve into as far as the decision of Ecowas is concerned. One, they've said that they have ordered the chief of defense staff, from all Ecowas to immediately, activate the Ecowas standby force. So it tells you that that is an immediate action, something that has to be done now. Then they talk about the fact that they want, they now order for the deployment, of Ecowas standby force to restore, the constitutional order. But in that second statement, it doesn't mention a time frame. So it looks like a two-stage process. One is to activate the Ecowas standby force in preparation, perhaps, for deployment. But when that deployment is going to be activated, has not been mentioned. So it's not an immediate action, from that point of view. Now, it comes at the backdrop of what ECOWAS says, that the Nigerian junta has refused any mediation. Remember that, a group of mediators were sent to meet with the military junta, but they were not given access. And ECOWAS also says that the deadline for the reinstatement of President Bazoum and perhaps his release has not been realized, and that the military junta has ignored all those orders. So we are at a very critical point that despite the sentiments we've seen, from the region, everybody talking about the fact that, there is no appetite for war, it seems as if we are very close to what I call a declaration of war against the juntas in Niger.
Now, David, if we take a look at the members of Ecowas, there are about 15 countries, I believe. Now, some of these 15 countries are in support of the military junta in Niger.
Yes, so ECOWAS is struggling to have a unanimous, vote in terms of getting all the 15 ECOWAS member states, from following up with its directives. Remember that countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, but of course, in Niger itself, will not be part of that ECOWAS standby force. So I'm not very sure how ECOWAS is going to be able to achieve, some kind of, an intervention without these four members. But also, ECOWAS is struggling to bring on board countries like Algeria, which shares a huge border with Niger. They are also struggling to gain the backing of Libya and the backing of Chad. Niger is surrounded by 7 states, and it's a landlocked country. The difficulty now for ECOWAS is how do you carry out a military intervention when about 4 or 5 of the states that share border with Niger are effectively saying, we are not interested in a military intervention. Let us pursue a peaceful dialogue. So this is one of the challenges that I think ECOWAS will have if and when they eventually decide that a military intervention is a go-go.
Now, will we take a look at the standby force that will go into Niger if it does so in the next few days or whatever time period they've given it? Let's look at the constitution of that standby force. Is any of that membership amongst the 5 or 6 countries or 7 countries, I think, that you mentioned that border Niger? Does Niger itself ordinarily have a membership in that army, in that force?
Yes, of course. The ECOWAS standby force had been activated years back. It's not a new force, but there was a problem of resources. What I see here is that in order for ECOWAS to deploy these forces, it takes a lot of logistics. War is all about logistics. You've got to, first of all, get members to contribute their forces. You've got to be able to, have a planning on your command and control. And this is why ECOWAS, had, ordered the chiefs of defense staff to come to Abuja, and have some kind of a preliminary plan. But the outcome of that meeting was that, the Chief of Defense, had stated that, yes, they were prepared if they were called to, but they preferred that other non-kinetic, other non-military measures are put in place. So ECOWAS is in a very challenging position in terms of getting together a standby force, especially if some of these member states have been voicing, as I know, that a military intervention is not in the interest of the region. It will make the volatile region a very difficult place to live, and effectively, this will destabilize and divide ECOWAS members into two: those who are pro, a military intervention, and those who are calling for a continuous pursuit of a dialogue strategy.
Now, in reports coming out of Niger over the last few days, there's been talk that there's been celebration, a huge support for Russia. In fact, Russian flags are running out, and people are buying them and ordering them by the dozen. We also know that one of the leaders, if I'm not mistaken, of a foreign force was in support of the coup that occurred recently, as potentially is Russia. Does this throw in another force? I think it was the Wagner Group, I meant to say. The leader of the Wagner Group was in support. Does this therefore throw in another force or another aspect to this equation?
Yes, you see, at some point in time, you can differentiate between what Russia says as a country. I mean, the Russia Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov himself, had condemned the coup. But we had the leader of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who had, made mention of the fact that, this was an anti-colonial movement, that it was a liberation war by the people of Niger. Now, what that does is, perhaps it brings into fore a pattern which we've seen in West Africa, from Mali to Burkina Faso to Guinea, and also to Central African Republic. I mean, literally, what Russia has done is that Russia has been pickpocketing the French territories as they fall off the cliff. And of course, what is going to be the next, playground for Wagner? I mean, this is, of course, Niger Republic. Niger has already had the direct support from countries like Burkina Faso and Mali. And we know that, the Wagner forces have a huge presence in terms of protecting the regime, but fighting also counter-insurgency operations. It therefore means that the Nigerian junta will be relying heavily on their brothers from Mali and Burkina Faso, who, of course, happen to be beneficiaries of coup as well. And therefore, indirectly, based on what we've seen, the atmospherics, people raising Russian flags, there is a likelihood that Wagner would benefit from the coup. Now, we do not have any evidence to show that they are behind the coup, but there is much evidence to show that they are likely to benefit from it.
Now, the coup leaders in Niger have appointed a new interim government recently. How do you interpret this move, and what implications does it have for ECOWAS, certainly their efforts to restore democracy?
The coup leaders are, playing by the books. They've seen the pattern and the trend in Niger, in Mali and Burkina Faso and other countries that we've had coups. They know that ECOWAS will be expecting, and the international community would come with the following words, restore democracy. So what the juntas, in Niger are doing, perhaps I think, they're being advised maybe by their colleagues in Mali and Burkina Faso. What they've done is those kind of, processes, for example, appointing ministers, made up of civilians and military personnel. They are already doing that. They've appointed 21 ministers, today. And that coincides with the same day that ECOWAS was sitting to talk about, what steps, are they going to take next. So that also shows that the military junta has now literally formed a transitional government. And it is possible that they will go ahead and, place a date for maybe, elections, to take place maybe after a year or something like that. Now, that gives them the backing, and it then kicks ECOWAS's idea of a military intervention out of the window. So they seem to be very clever in the way that they are going about this business of post-coup tactics. They've also, I have to mention, been able to convince not just other security agencies, but also the population to sing their praises. The population now sees this as some kind of an anti-colonial movement, a movement that is there to protect the resources of Niger from France, and they consider Ecowas as a puppet of the Western and French domination in the region. And they've made the population to believe that any attack by Ecowas is an indirect attack by France and the Western countries to regain, their domination of their country. So it makes it very difficult, even if Ecowas were to carry out a military intervention, for them to win. And there is one warning that the junta has given. They've made it very clear that in the event of a military intervention, the life of the president, President Bazoum, will likely be at risk. So we have to be very careful on how, of course, Ecowas has to be careful on how it carries out any sort of military intervention. We're worried about the stability of the region.
David, finally, is President Bazoum safe? Do you know his current state? We understand that he's under house arrest at the moment.
Well, President Bazoum has been under house arrest. I mean, we know that, when I spoke to a couple of people on ground, they say nobody knows where actually he is, but, he's been under house arrest. He's been able to communicate at some point, but I'm not sure whether he knows where he is. So that's a very difficult one. But we know he's alive. He's an insurance policy to the military junta. They know that by keeping him under house arrest, it guarantees them to, kind of proceed with the transitional government, and it provides some kind of a deterrence, from any military intervention. Because, of course, you can intervene, you can restore President Bazoum if you can find him, and even if you restore him, then you have to convince the population to welcome him as a president. Now it's uncharted waters, and time it's not on anyone's side. Bad times to come. But let's hope that we find a much more, some kind of a sustainable solution that prevents the region from instability.
David Otto, international security analyst, speaking to us from Abuja, Nigeria. Appreciate your time.